Have you ever been publicly embarrassed? Yesterday, I was leading a presentation for our biggest client when my boss interrupted me mid-sentence. "Actually, let me handle this part," he said, practically shoving me aside. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing this pitch. 3 weeks of late nights, weekend research, and endless revisions. My boss? He'd contributed exactly one email asking when it would be done. The client was Davidson Industries, a potential 8-figure contract that could change our entire quarter. I knew every detail of this proposal inside and out. I'd run through my presentation 17 times the night before. But none of that mattered now because my boss was standing in front of the projector, blocking my slides, telling our clients about his vision for their company. I stood there next to the whiteboard like a glorified assistant while he took credit for my market analysis, my cost projections, my implementation strategy. Everything I'd built from scratch was suddenly his brilliant idea. The Davidson team was eating it up. Their CEO kept nodding, scribbling notes. The CFO actually said, "This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we need." My boss smiled wider with each compliment. I felt invisible, worse than invisible. I was the backdrop to someone else's stolen success. For 10 excruciating minutes, I watched him bask in applause that should have been mine. He even threw in a few details wrong, but nobody noticed because his confidence sold it. He was getting everything I'd earned. Then came the Q&A section. The CEO leaned forward. "This implementation timeline you mentioned, walk me through the resource allocation for phase 2. How are you handling the bottleneck issues we discussed in our initial meeting?" My boss's smile flickered, just for a second. "Well, that's a great question. The bottleneck strategy is really about," he trailed off. I could see him searching for words he didn't have because he'd never attended that initial meeting. I had. The resources are allocated in a way that maximizes efficiency while minimizing redundancy. Corporate word salad. Empty phrases that sounded important but meant nothing. The CFO jumped in. "Can you be more specific? What's the actual headcount and timeline?" My boss looked at me. That same expectant look he always gave when he needed me to fix his mistakes behind the scenes. His eyes were practically screaming, "Save me." I just smiled back and stayed quiet. I'll need to review those specific numbers and get back to you on that," he stammered. The CEO's expression changed. The warmth disappeared. "These are pretty basic details. This is your proposal, correct?" "Absolutely, yes. Because we were told this was ready for final approval. If you don't know your own timeline, that's concerning." My boss's face was turning red. His confidence was evaporating in real time. "Of course I know it. I just prefer to have exact figures before I—" "Who actually worked on this proposal?" the CEO interrupted. Silence hung in the conference room. My boss opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I raised my hand. "I did. I can answer any questions you have." Every head in the room turned toward me. The CEO nodded slowly. "Please, go ahead." I walked to the front. My boss stepped aside, and for the first time that morning, I stood where I should have been standing all along. The implementation timeline is 16 weeks with mandatory checkpoints every 4 weeks. Phase 2 requires 12 specialists, 8 of whom will source internally, and 4 through our partner network. The bottleneck you mentioned gets addressed in week 7 with our parallel processing approach, which reduces downtime by 40% compared to traditional methods. The CFO was nodding. Now that's what I needed to hear. For the next 20 minutes, I answered every question they threw at me. Contract terms, risk assessment, contingency plans. I knew this proposal better than I knew my own address because I'd lived and breathed it for weeks. My boss just stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching his lie unravel in front of the most important clients we'd ever had. When the presentation ended, the CEO shook my hand first. "Impressive work, really impressive. We'll have contracts drawn up by Friday." We got the 8-figure deal, the biggest contract in our company's history. My boss got called into HR that same afternoon. Turns out 3 other people had filed complaints about him taking credit for their work over the past 6 months. My presentation was just the final straw that made everything explode.